without further delay, I'd like to turn today's program over to Greg Forrest, Chief Technical Officer for Contoural, who will moderate today's presentation and program. Greg, you have the floor.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're listening and watching this from. Welcome to Contoural's fourth seminar, Litigation Management Tools 101. I've got a long title here on the slide, but basically we're going to go over the components of a litigation management system, talk about what things you can automate for consistency and cost reduction. I will be joined today by my colleague, Reggie Poole. He is a licensed attorney, and we will be talking about litigation management tools. Now, a little disclaimer here. We do not give legal advice. Contoural is a consulting organization, and while we attempt to provide legal information to advise our clients on best practices for compliance in litigation and business, we are not giving legal advice. That should only come from your counsel themselves. This session is confidential, and the information presented here is proprietary to Contoural and cannot be used for other purposes without our written permission. Moving right along, I'd like to introduce Reggie Poole. I had the pleasure of working with Reggie on a number of different litigation management projects. He came to us from Contoural after doing litigation management support for a variety of other companies and working with some technology companies as well. Reggie, why don't you get us kicked off?
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending and giving us a chance to do this presentation. What I wanted to do today is go ahead and talk about the subject matter, which is the use of litigation management tools and how they can be applied in your environment and what types of questions or concerns you may want to have when you're dealing with these solutions. Really, before we get into the actual, going through the slide-by-slide presentation, let's talk a little bit about what the purpose of looking at using these litigation tools can be for your company. And one of the things we want to do before you step into a process of determining what tools you might need is to take a good look at the type of organization you're running from your litigation profile. Take a step back and kind of analyze what type of litigation you're involved in, what variety of information you are dealing with when you have to do productions, the size and scope of your typical litigations, when you have to put people on litigation hold, what do those processes look like, and kind of give an overall for your organization before you want to make these decisions. Because really what we found is that the organizations are really looking at three different areas or stages where they might apply technology where it could be useful. And those could be before litigation starts, kind of at a records management stage where we're looking at record or policy management, where you're looking at controlling your data on a day-to-day basis. And we see a lot of different fundamental differences between organizations and how they want to reduce their risk in the way that they handle records or information. The next stage is once you know of a potential litigation or you've been served with litigation, then you have to actually enter into what we call the legal hold process phase. And here you want to see and look at what technologies may be available to help you through the issuance of litigation holds, perhaps identifying and securing potentially relevant data, identifying custodians, and maybe and different applications where data may be stored, and how you would actually go through that process and what you can do to automate that process, and what can you do to reduce your risk through that automation. And the kind of the final phase that we look at as a consulting group when we're talking to these companies is the discovery management phase, and that's really where you're looking at how can you produce or basically identify, call down, and reduce the quantity of the corpus, and really hand over the data over to either outside counsel for a review process. Maybe your organization actually keeps these internally for review, and then before you produce to the other side. And really, what we're finding is, and what makes the most sense is that discovery phase is where there are a lot of cost savings additionally that can also be found by the organization. So not only do we have a risk management phase, we also do have a reduction in cost, which is a big piece of what you can achieve by using these litigation management tools. So kind of that being said, let's kind of look at the actual litigation management concerns as we have them listed out for this presentation. The first would be looking at, in terms of risk management and hold management, is that was there a litigation hold executed in time? Are you tracking the holds? Do you have assurance that things are happening in a standardized process. And there are a lot of technologies out there that we'll be able to talk a little bit about that can help automate these processes and make sure that you're tracking them adequately. And we're going to talk more about these as we go through. Also, other concerns are what data is out there. Do you have an understanding of what data exists in your organization, and how can you better either communicate that or show that information or find it easily? And then along the whole process, once the holds are issued, are you actually preserving and collecting that information correctly? And what technologies are available out there to help you do that? And along that same process, can you or do you have the ability to do an early case assessment? Can you use the technologies you have in place around your records management, around your archive, around your handling of your custodian data to be able to get an understanding of the case itself prior to having to go into the discovery phase, like an early case assessment? And then, as you move through the process, what can you do to actually reduce the costs? Where's the actual huge cost reduction that can come in handling discovery? And those are the things you consider. What technologies are available can help you do that around queue, perhaps, or analysis? And then once you produce your data, how do you actually make sure that you're treating those with chain of custody correctly, and that you can actually handle that last phase of the litigation process, which is the production process? How do you make sure that you have that chain of custody throughout the entire litigation life cycle, from the moment you've identified the data all the way through the production of the data itself? And then one of the pieces that we want to make sure that you want to make sure that you can actually achieve with the technology that you consider is not only the actual holding of the data, but the releasing of the data, or the releasing of holds, or releasing of custodian information once the actual litigation is over with. And can you assure through your systems that the data has been correctly collected and has been disposed properly? And so these are some of the concerns and some of the focuses that we often work with our clients to make sure that they're addressing when they're now analyzing what type of solutions are available out there and how these solutions actually address these concerns. Now, one second. Some of the things that we will talk about, and I want to give you a lot more detail on these, so this is not going to be like a read through the slides kind of presentation, but I do want to at least point these out at this level, is that there are certain building blocks or components of technology that we work with our clients in terms of looking at or considering while they're putting together a litigation readiness or potential litigation management solution. And these include the litigation hold notice tracking systems that are out there. There are systems that actually provide policy and procedure management, and some of these tie together. There's also how can you control or understand the data that's out in your system, what type of perhaps ESI solution or ESI mapping solutions are available to understand and control or be able to communicate what data or records exist in your system. And then also what type of solutions do you have for understanding the organization, the people that are in your organization, and how they're related to the information. And then we also have solutions around discovery and collection. What solutions are available to help you through those pieces? Data preservation, data processing, review, and data production. And those last groups, as I mentioned earlier, are really where you're going to find the key cost savings when you're looking at these litigation management solutions. But again, these are all kind of components, and Greg will talk about this a little bit later, but these can easily be individual solutions that you can work on tying together. And a lot of these actually do communicate very well to pass the information back and forth, or you may decide that, and there are systems out there that provide kind of one-stop shops, if you will, where one system will control the whole process for you. And you can actually handle 80 to 90% of what we're talking about right now through one vendor or one type of solution. So we will talk about those a little bit more. But what I really want to talk about right now are these individual components and how you may consider them and how you may be able to walk through them. So the litigation hold and notice tracking, this is a key component that really at the onset of litigation itself, this is an area where automation can really be effective. A lot of the times we will go out and talk to clients and we will see a wide variety of processes that are in place for actually being able to track or implement any type of litigation hold. This could be anything from manual tracking through spreadsheets or lists, through a minimum level of automation through the use of their email clients to be able to track these notifications back and forth. But what we're seeing is that there's a a large set of tools out there now, and organizations or these companies are coming up with solutions that could be considered to actually help track these different types of notices that will be part of a litigation hold. The set that I have up on screen here is just a good example of the different types of notices that are potentially or usually issued with any given litigation. And so I want to show this to you to give you an idea that really it's not all about just the initial litigation hold notice where you're notifying custodians and data stewards and IT groups that you are in the middle, you have a potential litigation or you're in litigation, and that you need to hold the data to maintain that information, not to destroy, to take it out in the normal course of your records management policy, but to actually set those aside. There are other notices and basically information that can be utilized through the litigation hold process that can be tracked and can be automated. Some of these are like these interview notices, and once you have information or you know that you need to start working with a custodian, that you want to be able to find out additional information that they have. Collection notices where you actually reach out and use the system itself to tell custodians that they need to actually gather information, perhaps drop information manually into a secure preservation area, which I think Greg's definitely got some thoughts around that and can share with you to share that with you later. But also there's the automated, a notification to kick off an automated collection, perhaps a forensics collection through a forensics tool or an automated data collection through the IT group. And there's also the data reuses, disposal information to be able to send out notices that will automatically or help dispose of data in an automated process rather than having to rely on the custodians or the data stewards to get rid of information that you've already stored. And then there's to be able to release the information. And the key thing about these notices themselves is not just the actual sending out of the notices, but it's the tracking and the follow-up. And these systems that automate this process really are really built to handle just exactly that. They can track all responses that come back, make sure that individual users and custodians are acknowledging these forms as they go out, and then also can send repeated reminders to make sure that people understand that they're still under hold. This can take this process out of a manual, like I said, where you have staff that are dedicated or have to take part of their time out to actually track these litigation holds, and it can automate this process, kind of reducing the overhead, but also giving you a level of accuracy and repeatability that you're not going to be able to have if you rely strictly on a manual process. This really can automate that whole system.
Yeah, I think, Reggie, one of the things that I always like about these types of systems is, and that I get feedback back from my legal clients, is that it allows for a set of consistency in the messages. So one of the things that, unfortunately, not having an audited system does is that every hold notice looks slightly different. This is a good way to get common language in all these notices, make sure that the collections are consistent, but more importantly, also it gives you an audit trail. So you can at any time print out reports that will show exactly which notices went to which people, when they were acknowledged, when they were released, those types of things. It's very easy after the fact to go back and recreate the history of a case.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That's very true. And as we know, there are some key components that you can go out. I mean, and we advise our clients on that each of these types of systems has to have. And a big piece of that is the auditability. You have to be able to show that you have done, to your best efforts, made sure that individuals are aware of a hold, that it's in place, that you continue to remind those individuals that holds are in place, that you track their acknowledgement that they did receive the hold notice. And these types of systems make it very easy to do that. And when you're in an audit process, you can quickly go back and see who should be doing something, double check to make sure they are happening, etc. And that's part of what we, as a consultant, help our clients understand and put these kind of processes in place. The next slide, the one that I just moved to, this is more of the policy and procedure management. This is more of how do you automate, how do you make sure that certain specific things happen. And I broke this into the kind of the three categories I mentioned above, which is part of the Contoural litigation readiness timeline. And this is how we actually work with our clients to help do an assessment of their litigation readiness. And we look at individual factors such as what policies and procedures they have in place. And this is certainly not exclusive of any other information we look at, such as different policies they may have around paper or other types of documents or records. But these are good examples of, in a litigation mindset, especially litigation management and automation, what types of policies can they have that can actually be automated and where technology can be applied? Things like record management, record schedules, deletions, how they can manage the paper and electronics. Another area where it's interesting that you wouldn't think of initially right off the top for litigation management systems is asset management, and how you can track what assets an individual or the organization has and what individual has control of those assets at any given point in time, and how those systems can tie into your overall litigation management. So these could be ancillary systems, maybe not part of your initial a real focus towards litigation management, but you can use that same information and tie it into your litigation management process to be able to track that information if you have the right tools, and how you can integrate those into the right tools. Other things are such as working with the HR group and understanding when employees are terminated and if those employees are on hold, or when employees are up for different types of procedural sanctions or any reason they may be under investigation. So you track those things and tie that into your litigation management solution. There's some automation that can happen there to really help make sure, again, consistency is in place, that it happens the same way every time. This even goes towards usage policies around email and making sure that individuals are doing the right things and keeping the right information. Those are the kind of policies that can actually be a piece of your litigation management strategy and how they're automated. Once holds go into place, we just talked a little bit about how holds can be processed and automated through acknowledgments and making sure that things are being tracked appropriately. There's operating procedures for making sure that data is being collected correctly from different types of solutions, and how can you automate those processes, and how can you track that information to make sure it's being done correctly. And then finally, on the discovery and production side of things, what can you as an organization do to really make sure you reduce the cost of a potential litigation? Because a lot of, as we already know and I mentioned above, a lot of the cost of any litigation really focuses on that discovery and that review process, or that being able to produce the information, relevant information, and having to go through potentially millions of records of information with inside counsel, review groups, outside counsel. What can you do as an organization in your litigation management process to reduce those costs, to make sure that you're only providing that information which is relevant to the case or potentially responsive? How can you reduce that information? What technologies can you implement that will actually make you more efficient in how you work with these outside groups or these outside counsel to reduce your costs? Really, and kind of the next piece that we talked about to look at is how do you work with data or people mapping, and what kind of systems are available for that. And these are kind of these litigation, I should say these data mapping solutions. And there's kind of two ways to think about this. There's looking at it from a data perspective, and in litigation, what type of information is available, what records do you maintain in your organization that are in applications. We're calling it ESI, electronically stored information now. And there are solutions out there like ESI data maps, which are either applications or technology-based solutions that will help you as an organization or help your client identify the information stored within the organization. Now, the ESI data map, this electronically stored information, has been called out in the new federal rules. It's become a real main focus of a lot of the discovery nowadays. And as most of our information, over 80% of the information in an organization nowadays being generated is in an electronic format, it's the ability to identify these electronic records, where they're stored within an organization, who has access to these records, and so it's mapping not only the application that exists, the data that could exist in that application, but who has control of this data? What individuals within the organization are either the custodians or have access to this information that may be potentially relevant? So you can look at that in one of two ways. When looking at litigation, you can either start by looking at the individual and seeing what information or what resources he may have access to, or you can flip it around and start seeing information that you're looking for based on the litigation type, or when you go into your meet and confer, and if you're looking for this information, it's either stored in these different repositories, these different applications, and stewarded by these custodians, or it also can exist in a different form altogether. So these data maps that we're talking about, these kind of solutions can help map that information out and really make it easy to understand where the information is available in the organization. There's also another piece which is more of the asset tracking, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and that's understanding what assets individuals have access to. So if you're working with your different potentially asset tracking solutions or technologies within your organization, how can you tie those to your litigation management solution? How can those be tied directly into, let's say, an automated litigation hold tool that will automatically populate those assets into an interview form that you may need to send out to your custodians? So the custodians can actually look and say, you could say, here's what we show that you have as a custodian that are potential data sources. As the interview form can be automated to let them either accept that list or update that list. And what that does is give you a way of tracking and keeping an up-to-date list of the different assets or different information sources that your custodians can have out there. So how can the existing systems you have, or maybe a system that you need to implement, help you track that process through the litigation whole process? And so these are things to consider. What these types of solutions that are out there that will actually bring these things together. And it's really and they all tie together as well. And so the nice thing about these solutions, as you can already tell, is they're not just specific to litigation management. Once you've created, let's say, an ESI data map that helps organize who has control of what information within your system, and that's a tool that other organizations, other pieces of your organization outside of legal can utilize. I mean, think how much easier it makes it for a IT person to be able to go to this map to identify what users may be working with what applications, or if HR needs to be able to look at an individual to see where or what information you may have available. So these aren't just exclusively legal tools, but they do fit a specific need around the litigation model.
So Reggie, before we move on, why don't you talk a little bit about the type of processes that you might also tie in from an HR perspective. I know you talked a lot about data and people, but there's also some things that have really helped our customers from the perspective of, say, employee terminations and those types of things by tying them back into the system.
And that's a really good point, Greg. And as we talk to our different customers, I see different levels of automation or different levels of sophistication, and really communication between the legal group and other functional groups within their organization. And one of the key ones that we see that really should have focus is between the legal team and HR. And I know that seems pretty obvious because a lot of the lawsuits that we have are either going to be about a product, about an individual, or about money, and so the individual is kind of always a key piece in there. But what you have to think about is take it away from just, legal needs to know, legal needs to talk to HR because of potential liability around individuals. Think of it more in terms of HR really has to have a good communication with legal by understanding if a litigation occurs and there are custodians or individuals in the organization that are being placed on hold, how is that communicated to HR so that HR knows if there are terminations that happen, there are layoffs, people are going on long leaves of absence, or et cetera, that they communicate back to legal that, hey, the people that you have on hold are either going to be leaving the organization in a matter of weeks, they'll be walking out the door tomorrow, or they may not be available for you to have access to for the next 6 weeks. That could either be a manual process or, depending on the level of sophistication of the organization, this could be an automated process, and where we've seen with some groups that they're able to have the HR solutions and communicate back and forth directly with the HR solutions through their automated litigation hold tool. And that way they have a constant update of any individuals that may be pending termination, going through immediate termination, or on leave, and they know, legal then knows that they need to either advance their interview or be able to contact an individual or have IT make sure that they gain control of any of their assets, such as laptops, hard drives, data on storage devices, etc. And that's really a great integration point, Greg. I think that's something that we really work with our clients to make sure that they're thinking of all these minutiae, if you will, to when they're selecting these kind of systems. How can they best implement them? So really what I'm looking at here is the EDRM model, and this is probably well known to those of you in the legal groups. But if you haven't seen this before, this is really the electronic discovery reference model. This is a model that has been developed by different groups, lawyers, law firms, vendors, etc., that really has kind of standardized a model for looking at the litigation process. And as you can see, it's got several different sections, starting with record management all the way through data production, and different, the individual rectangles and identify kind of different areas or functional areas that process occurs, actions occur, and it kind of breaks them down into these different groups. What we're doing here is kind of showing you that when you're thinking about technology in terms of a litigation lifecycle or the litigation process and using the EDRM model, really there are going to be certain areas where you can leverage technology for litigation, your litigation technology, pretty substantially to help reduce risk. And not only can you be reducing the risk, but you actually can help reduce specific costs regarding the litigation that can occur. So when we look at this slide, anything between the green bars, see the arrows pointing inwards, those are areas where technology can really be applied effectively to help reduce the risk. And if you see the blue shaded area that kind of covers processing, review, analysis, and production, well, if you recall earlier, I talked about these are areas that are kind of the highest expense during any litigation process. And by looking at the solutions for automating this processes, like reducing the amount of data that has to be turned over for review, incorporating very sophisticated search and analysis tools, really reducing or culling down the corpus of information that you have to produce over, organizing in a way that makes it easier to review. Utilizing solutions like that, you can have a substantial return on investment in terms of the use of the tools that are out there. So you can really leverage the technology most effectively for a cost savings focus in those areas. But really, if you think about it, and while it's easy to quantify things like cost savings on an hourly review rate or how much documents cost to be processed, the other factor is actually the reduction of risk, and that's what really a lot of this is all about. Is how can I minimize the amount of risk that I'm looking at? And if even though that, while harder to quantify, it's something that can't be ignored. And by utilizing solutions that can help automate, and I keep going back to the word automate, because it's about doing the same thing effectively over and over again, is the way to reduce the risk through things like identification and hold processes, and communication, tracking, auditing, etc. And so that's really what we're talking about. So the reduction of costs can really be, just to summarize, reductions of costs can be really found around the process review and analysis when falling into production. But overall cost risk reduction is kind of the primary goal for these litigation management tools. When I've been out there and working on the vendor side and talking to these individuals and trying to talk to corporations and helping them understand the purpose or what's the reason for doing this, why would I want to implement a solution that allows me to either save information or track information or keep things longer than, maybe organize things where I can find them easier. Because, that's one of the things that I've always found out there is that you're going to have two sides of the camp. There are those who don't want to keep anything longer than they have to. They'll keep a minimal amount of information. And there are those on the other side of the camp that say, I need to be able to keep as much as I can that I have available to me because I can keep it now because of technology. And so really, what we found is that most organizations kind of fall in the middle. They'll use things like email and file archival to be able to organize and keep information, but they'll also try to use those same technologies to apply policy to cull that information out and only keep those things that either they're required to for business purposes or for legal purposes or requirements purposes, and then get rid of those things that they don't actually need to have. And so there's kind of a mix in between. No one really falls on either one side or the other. But it's that risk reduction process that really is where the technology can come into play. So that being said, and kind of understanding your risk of your organization, and this kind of goes back to where I started the conversation, the best thing to do is really understand your litigation profile and the needs of your organization. By doing that, you're able to decide what means the most to you, what areas should you focus on out of those building blocks that I discussed earlier. Where does it make the most sense? Where will you find the best return on an investment in technology in any or all of these areas? This table that I just pulled up really kind of gives an overall thought of the different areas that you might look at when you're considering implementing, and just like those building blocks before, these are just but these are, instead of being specific building blocks, these are more categories of areas where you can look at where you're currently doing processes, versus where automation could help you improve your processes. Let's take it like a hold notice or a search. Let's take search as an example. Today, perhaps when you're doing a search to identify specific information with your organization based on a need for a litigation comes up, perhaps now you're doing an ad hoc process. Well, the table that I'm showing you actually has 5 different columns mapped out, one being initial, the second being repeatable, define, manage, and optimize. These are kind of what we call at Contoural our maturity model. Where does your organization currently live within this process of perhaps hold notices, data preservations, production? And where does it make sense that you need to be in your litigation readiness to meet your litigation readiness needs? Perhaps that because of the way you're structured, you don't have that much litigation around employees, etc. It may be enough that you have a manual process. A small organization may not need to automate a litigation hold process to the extent that a company that has, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees need to. Maybe that your data sets are so already centralized that you don't need to have a search process outside of an ad hoc search process. Well, what we can do, what you should do is really come in, and we work with our clients to help analyze this and get an understanding of where they fall within these processes now, and where they should fall. It might not make sense to an organization that they need to use technology to get themselves to an optimized area for hold management if they don't have that many employees. Maybe a manual process is enough. So maybe they should focus their funds and their focus of their litigation readiness on something else, such as search or production, or maybe process and review or preservation. So it's the ability to come in here and understand where you should fall within these standards and where you are currently. So what we do is come in, or what you should do, I should say, is look at the available technology options and where they can help you for the amount of effort you want to put in, the investment you want to make, fall within these premises. So really what we found is that by the effective use of technology, you can really take yourself on any one of these categories, from an ad hoc initial process of manually doing things, quickly taking yourself to either a managed or even optimized solution by the application of the correct technology in the correct manner. Without the technology, it is possible to reach the managed or optimized solution, if you will, but it's a much longer process, and it takes much more overhead. There's a larger employee cost, etc. So where can you leverage the technologies that are out there to be able to quickly put yourself into a more strategic position with any one of these categories? So Greg, with that, I'll kind of hand it off to you, and you can talk more around the factors that kind of help drive the different strategy you might put into place.
Absolutely, Reggie. Thank you very much. So as you can imagine, getting a full suite that handles all the factors that Reggie just talked about, or all the components or the building blocks, can be rather expensive. And for a lot of companies, that investment probably doesn't make a lot of sense, either from a return on investment from a financial perspective or even from a risk reduction perspective. It really depends on where you are. And we kind of look at advising our customers on what to automate and also what to focus on in this kind of matrix of possibilities in terms of the factors that drive your overall strategy. The first is your litigation profile. How much litigation do you actually have? How much have you had in the past? How much can you forecast moving forward? What types of litigation do you have? Is it really the same 5 people over and over again, and basically you've already got everything for them all journaled and held and captured, and you've got processes to take care of that, in which case you probably don't need all these extra tools. On the other hand, if you're a very large company, you've got a lot of litigation, and a lot of people get involved in that litigation, the ability to track and manage the whole activity end to end starts to get very difficult in anything but an automated system. So that might be an area that would cause you to need to invest. The second is really the company and the size and the use of documents. Again, how big are you? How many people are using documents on a regular basis that are considered records that might need to be produced at some point in time? How are they distributed across the organization? Again, if you're a huge organization but only 100 people actually have access to true business records and the rest are working point of sale or in retail or working out on a shop floor someplace, well, you're not really as worried about keeping track of their information. And so that's an area that could determine how much is appropriate to invest. Your industry is also extremely important. Even if you're a smaller player in an industry that has some large players, sometimes the burden can be the same for you. small player as it is for those large players. And it's very important, therefore, that you take a look at the types of litigation that are going on around you for other people in your industry. If you're seeing a lot of litigation from there, it may be that that same exact burden will be placed on you later on, in which case investment might make sense. And finally, regulatory compliance. Most of these systems, while they are designed to help you with litigation, can also help you with things like forensic investigation, things like privacy requirement issues. It's not all about just litigation. These systems also will work to help you in other regulatory and compliance areas as well. So it's important to look at all four of these quadrants to make a good decision on how to make your investment. And that's one of the key things that we do with most customers, is take a look at exactly what they need before we make any kind of decisions about what kind of tool sets to go out and look at. And with that, let's kind of look at some of the tool sets themselves. We talked about what's actually available to hit these individual components. So the first are litigation hold management tools. These have actually been around anywhere from 2 to 5 years. They come from a couple of different places, either from your traditional software vendors that have specific tools aimed at the legal space that have been around for a period of time. And in some cases, they may be actual solutions that a specific law firm either offers for free to their clients or offers as a pay-for-use service for individuals that basically are based on Microsoft SharePoint, based on Exchange and email, and have the ability to track and handle your management issues from a litigation perspective, either as a standalone option or as something that integrates with a policy management tool. Those two things tend to be sold together, and usually a company will have each of these two components. And the idea is to be able to keep the policies and the procedures in the same system that's actually enforcing your litigation management. So these tools typically get sold, and there's about 5 vendors in this space, 2 that are really well established, and there's always 2 or 3 that are kind of up and coming. And I am not going to talk about vendor names in this presentation. I'd be more than happy to have that discussion with you offline or through email, but it's because we are an independent service provider, we don't talk about individual companies during these types of seminars. From a collection and preservation tool perspective, there's really 2 main ways that these are offered out in the marketplace. For a long time, there have been tools that are designed to capture hard disks, whether they do that on just capturing all the files on the disk, or whether they actually do a full forensic capture of the entire image so that you can get at even deleted files. These basically are what I would call a single repository tool, i.e. a capture tool that's designed for collection of a single custodian or a single asset. So maybe they do all of email. An email archiving system could be considered a collection and preservation tool in and of itself. The newest members of this club are the multi-repository collectors, and these are more enterprise-driven. And the idea here is that you have a single system that uses exactly the same search criteria, exactly the same type of indexing into a single preservation area for everything that you need for litigation, regardless of whether it lives on an individual computer or whether it's an overall system that the entire enterprise uses. There's a number of vendors that are moving into this space. I see IT-based search tools moving into the legal arena. I see legal-based search tools moving down into the overall enterprise arena. But the end goal of all of these is to sit on a network somewhere and pull information from individual computers or individual systems into a common area. Now, the good news about this is, unlike the single repository tools, you typically don't have to let the custodian know that you're even collecting. You can collect their hard drive at night over the network without them even knowing that it occurred, and certainly without disrupting them for a day or so, which some of the single repository tools will do. And then finally, probably the biggest growth I've seen in the most players in the industry that are coming online, a lot of venture capital in this area, is processing and review tools that are more geared now towards individual law firms and towards actually enterprises themselves. And the idea is that for a long time, a lot of outside processing and review was only being done by outside counsel. And that got to be quite expensive. And so a niche basically built up for software vendors to come back and bring some of those capabilities in-house. And a lot of our customers are taking a look at these now. And they come in pretty much 3 different flavors. The first is they're integrated into archiving solutions themselves. So you may have an email archive that IT implemented for you in order to reduce costs overall, basically, to make it cheaper to hold email. But they may also have a module that they sell which allows you to do very complex searching inside that archive to produce just the information you need for a particular case. So this is an idea where you're basically, your discovery accelerator tool is integrated into your overall archive. The next piece is really standalone that have been designed to be used only by legal professionals. And these are tools that originally were just in your outside counsel's hands. What I'm seeing is that a lot of those are migrating in-house, not necessarily for final production for going to court, but instead for early case assessment, giving you the same power that your outside counsel has to look at a variety of data that you've collected using the collection and preservation tools, and to provide you a first-level understanding of a case long before you get into litigation that may actually allow you to settle that case quickly and efficiently, and therefore reduce the cost of actually going to court. So these are pretty much the 4 main areas where I'm seeing tool sets. And to be honest, in any one of these areas, a particular vendor may have 5 or 6 pieces that work together to be able to handle this entire piece of functionality. And so it gets kind of confusing which of these tools you need for your specific need. And so very high level of attention paid to collecting your requirements prior to going out and working with vendors is usually going to pay off quite a bit, because these things get expensive once you start cascading them together. Now, the interesting thing about all of these tools is that a lot of the vendors in different spaces that I've been discussing do have relationships with each other. Now, they can vary. Sometimes they are strictly a marketing relationship. You know, yeah, we work with these people, which basically means that they will both talk to you about the way that their legal hold management system integrates in with a collection tool to allow the collection tool to work well with their management system. Now, some of those integrations are frankly quite lightweight and don't really offer you much. Others are very integrated at an extreme technical level. For instance, a lot of the search and discovery vendors, a lot of the review vendors are now actually integrating in with archive vendors to allow the archive to become a target for their review tools, and to allow you to actually tag and mark files with specific things like privilege, for sake of argument, inside that archive from the outside review tool. Those types of integrations are extremely powerful. So at some level, even if you're going to buy only 1 or 2 components, because that's what your profile shows that you should do, you may want to look at what integrations one or more of them have. And this is where we start with a lot of customers. We're brought in basically to evaluate their choices. They're saying, you know, we're looking at 2 or 3 vendors in these 2 areas. What makes the most sense here for us? You know, what's going to give us the best value? What do you know about these folks? And a lot of times what we uncover is they haven't actually looked at the functional requirements and therefore are looking at the wrong vendors. So, but very important that you look at what, if you go for the component route, what integration already exists. And then the newest members of this club, and the ones that are probably going to 2 or 3 years from now be the way that this is typically sold, are complete suites, where the vendor themselves has bought 3 or 4 of the components and have started to integrate them into a single solution. And we'll be real honest with you, most of these vendors are still struggling to really offer that one-stop solution. And they have their own integration problems internally. On the other hand, you only have one person to deal with, and it's their issue to get the integration working on their dime, instead of your issue to try to get the components to cooperate and communicate with each other. So in some cases, if you're a larger enterprise with a lot of litigation, and you're looking at trying to solve this problem across the board, both from a risk reduction and a cost reduction basis, then it really makes sense to start to go out and look at some of these complete suites. I've had a number of customers who were looking at one or two of the components, but they knew they were going to need them all over time, and it really made more sense for them to start with a vendor that offered all the different possibilities so that they could build on with that vendor over time on a single solution rather than try to integrate multiple solutions. So it's really still kind of up in the air. What makes sense is is it better to build it yourself? Is it better to take one or two components and just use what you need? Or is it better to buy the entire suite? As I said, this will shake out over the next couple of years, and I really do anticipate that a lot of these suites are going to be the best way to go and the most viable. But as of now, some of them are still struggling to get their suite, quote unquote, really working the way that it should. So to kind of move on into, so what do I do once I bought all this stuff? How do I put this all together? I'd like to talk a little bit about a company that we've worked with in order to get their entire suite deployed. Now they did originally look at components and did decide to buy a complete end-to-end solution from a single vendor. Even so, it took about 9 months until that system was fully live. Now they started with taking a look at their current processes. The first activity we did with them was to assess what their current process, their litigation profile, and their costs look like. We really kind of took a really tight look at those, and from those we drove their procurement process. The next step was to really do data integration. They brought in their asset management systems and their human resources systems, in this case SAP, and they were able to actually have inside their litigation management system 100% of all employees and all their assets all listed and integrated. This made collection extremely easy. It made hold really easy because a paralegal could actually just click on an employee and say, I want this laptop and this desk cell phone and this file share. I want these put on hold. And they could actually tell the custodian exactly which parts of the organization and the environment they wanted them to worry about. It also allowed them, when it came time to collection, to actually use the system to collect data from just those places. Once they looked at their current processes, they realized that a number of them needed optimization in order to be consistent, in order to be consistently defensible, in order to have good audit trails. And so they began to develop these new process flows and work with the vendor to customize their tool in order to do exactly what that company wanted. And I will be honest with you, regardless of which of these components you buy, you will need to do some customization for your particular environment. The way that your staff works, the size of your staff. You may be a giant corporation with only 10 legal staff for litigation, in which case you're not going to be able to have all the in-house review and the production be focused on those 10 people, which means you need to change the way that you use some of these tools. So that takes some time. Certainly they needed to identify the data stewards in IT, so there's a little bit of data mapping that needs to go on. Even if you're pulling in from asset management systems, you still need to know who's in charge of the core applications so that you can work with them to do collections on your behalf. From an automated perspective, this company picked 3 things. They picked their workstations, the hard drives on their laptops and their desktops. They picked their email and they picked their file systems as the major places that they wanted to be able to collect with from the system on an automatic basis. And so there was some integration necessary to get those systems of record available as part of the collection process. And then finally they did a pilot for a small number of legal users and all the IT data stewards that would be involved, and then they were able to do some training for the rest of the legal staff and go live. But I don't want you to get the impression this is something that's just going to go in overnight. This does take time. Probably 6 months to a year is going to be your experience if you try to do a lot of these tools end to end. Okay, well thank you very much for listening to our overall presentation today. A little bit about us. Contoural is a consultant-only company. We do not buy or sell any software or hardware. We do not take referrals. We focus primarily on litigation readiness, on data storage for compliance purposes. We do not, as I said, sell any products. We are located all around the U.S., but we have done engagements across the world. And typically, when we go international, it's because we work with a multinational company that's based in the United States. From a services perspective, we've got a variety of services to help all the way through, from records retention schedules to policies, to litigation readiness, to archiving, to training, development, and audit of the various systems. We do data classification and tiered storage services as well for those folks in IT that are trying to reduce cost. But primarily, we focus on litigation readiness. In this particular area, the area of litigation management services, we really have three offerings. Sometimes we offer them as an entire package. Sometimes they're individual components. The first is really to decide, where are you? What requirements do you actually have? Where does it make sense to invest? Where's your return on investment from a financial perspective? What risks are you facing as an organization if you don't automate some of your pieces? This is a short service where we come in and we really try to figure out with you what exactly you need. Once you've gone past that point and decided what it is that you need to move into, we can manage the vendor selection process, write RFPs for you, do your system designs, and kind of run through the process up into the point of making the selection. And then finally, we have a deployment planning service. So once you've bought your products, decided to move them into your organization, if you need someone to come in and help product management and guide you through that deployment, we can do that for you, either end-to-end or just as a set of plans, project plans, schedules, and audit necessities in order to make that successful. What do our customers tell us they choose us? Well, we have a very real-world approach. We are independent. The fact that we don't sell or resell products means that our advice will be the best we can do for you as a company based on best practices. We are a combination of legal and IT people with 20 years plus experience, almost all of us, and the idea is to make sure that we can sit in both camps, that we can understand your legal drivers, but at the same time deliver your technology that will be successful. We tend to have a very end-to-end approach, so this isn't come in and give you a strategy and you can put it on a binder on a shelf. We make sure that whatever we do is actionable and it's something that you can do. Basically, we tend to customize a lot of our work. It's not that we have just one service that we offer over and over again exactly the same way. We'll do what's necessary for you. If you'd like to get started with us, we do offer an on-site seminar where we can talk about some best practices for reducing your risk and compliance and cost, those types of things. Our CEO, Mark Diamond, will come in and give a couple hours talk to your legal and IT staff combined, and potentially some of your business folks. The idea here is to just give you an idea of the understanding of the landscape. So if you like the information you've heard on these webinars and seen on our web pages and would like to get a person-to-person presentation, we can come in and make that happen for you. Our next webinar in the series will be Email Archiving 101. And this is really geared towards a non-technical audience to understand what an email archive can bring to your organization and allow you to do. If you'd like more information, we are at www.contoural.com. There's a variety of different white papers and articles. It's where most of you registered for this, so you should be able to find that. Our emails, our addresses are also on there, and if you'd like to ask specific questions about today's presentation, please don't hesitate to email me. And finally, I think Reggie's going to give us a little bit of an idea of what you should take away from this and how to move forward.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, and we're running out of time, so I'll make it quick. The things that I want you to really think about is try to begin with the end in mind. To quote Mr. Covey, think about the problems you're really trying to solve. Look at your organization. Make sure you understand your litigation profile, where your areas of pain are. Look at what areas you think that an automation could benefit you the most. There are certain activities and levels of effort that you really could focus on that would make more sense to your organization than it would to someone else. So really, it's a customized solution. Don't try to think of it as, well, if they're doing it, I should do it. Look at it as in terms of what can I do to best benefit my organization around risk management and efficiency and reducing costs. Only choose the components that fit your strategy and realize that automation will reduce your risk, and that the first step towards this process is to really get an initial assessment of where do you stand, where are your biggest risk areas, and what can you do to proceed.
Thank you, Reggie, and thank you for listening. We've got just a couple of minutes left, although we can hang around for just a little bit. So if you do have any questions, either online or over the phone, we'd be happy to answer them now.
If you have a question on the phone line, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledging a request and a prompt to record your name. If you would like to withdraw your question, please press star, then the number 2. Please remember to take your phone off of mute before recording your name. Thank you. We'll pause for just a moment.
And while you're checking on that, I also want to remind our audience members that you're more than welcome to type your questions into the live meeting client. Again, to do so, just click on the Q&A button from your upper toolbar. Within that pane, type your question into the field next to the Ask button, and then click Ask to submit that. I just posted a survey, so you should see that within the slide area. Again, if you could please take a moment to fill out that survey while we're responding to your questions, we would appreciate your feedback. Operator, do we have any live callers at this point?
There are no questions in queue.
Okay, let's give it some more time, and we'll check the queue to see if there are any typed-in questions as well. So, Greg, I'll maybe hand the call back to you to see if there are any typed-in questions.
Okay, I don't see any at this time, but certainly please email us if you've got any that you think of afterwards, and we appreciate your time today.
Great. And operator, any live callers at this point?
No, sir.
Okay. And still no typed-in questions. Greg, any final comments or Reggie?
Just thank you all for attending, and I hope that we can help you with your needs sometime in the future. And please, if you're interested in email archiving, come back to us next month.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. As a reminder, you'll receive an email in the next day or two with a link to the recorded version of this webcast. Again, please fill out the survey before you log out of the conference. But this does conclude today's meeting. Thank you for joining, and you may now all disconnect.
Thank you for participating.